Do you have a rant? Can you just, can I just let you go?
I don't have a rant, Joe. I'm sorry to disappoint you. Let me say a few things that I think are important to remember here. I think there's been a lot of focus on why Jay Powell only went a quarter point instead of a half a point in July, and what's basically is he weighing in terms of whether he goes again in September. I think the bottom line is this. The data has yet to make a compelling case that they need to cut a lot, like 50, 75, 100 basis points. I take what Steve Liesman was just saying very seriously. The global economy is slowing. We do not have strong evidence that's happening in the U.S. outside a narrow part of the manufacturing sector. However, if you're in risk management mode, as the Fed is now, by which I mean you're setting policy not for what you think is going to happen, but what might happen, then you do want to ease because the risks are definitely to the downside. The problem for Powell is he has a committee that does not see those risks as strongly as he does. You have a committee that does not see the data falling apart and is not as worried about as low inflation. So I think bottom line right now is still cautious quarter-point moves and very much a data-dependent Fed.
Jay, you heard Greg and Steve. What struck you, or what do you agree with, disagree with?
Well, I generally agree with both of them. I mean, I agree with what Greg just said there. The Fed is the FOMC is a very consensus-driven sort of place. They've got to have like a supermajority to move. And we know there was 2 dissents back in July. A number of Fed presidents have come out recently saying they don't think they should be easing dramatically here. So as you go forward, I mean, unless the data just starts to fall apart, and it has not at this point, unless the data just starts to fall apart, I think you're looking at very cautious Fed moving at only 25 basis points a clip.
Joe, when we book our guests in Jackson Hole, we don't do it based on what they think about policy. It just so happened that the way it worked out, we had Esther George, right, and then we had Robert Kaplan. We got people who said, you know what, it's not so clear to us that we should be cutting rates. You know, I stepped back and I said, I was trying to think about other times when the Fed has moved. Those times, it's been clear to me what the Fed should do and why they're doing it. Even if I disagreed or not, I sort of understood it. Sort of summarizing what Greg just said, the next moves are not so obvious. The data I put up about global manufacturing.
Do you think the last move was obvious?
Maybe taken back December, yeah. So I don't see the only reason to do so. There's a couple reasons. One is the global structure of things, which is that can you be so far from where Europe is?
Why should we be the beacon in the world that maintains positive interest rates?
Well, you know, I asked the Fed folks that. I think I talked to 5 or 6 of them there. They all pretty much had the same answer, which is that when you look at the U.S. economy,
right,
you can say the same data 2 ways. We're running short of our 2% inflation goal, or we're real close to our 2% inflation goal.
Right. I know. I hear that all the time.
Right.
You've heard me. I mean, if we could really count on secular disinflation for like the next 5 years, let's go to zero. Let's put the pedal to the metal. Let's do it. If we got nothing to worry about.
Hey, Joe.
Greg,
yeah.
I wanted to just actually jump in and comment on something Joe just said, which is about why should we have the highest interest rates in the world. Yep. You know, I think this is a fascinating observation, not because it's wrong, but because in my years of covering the Fed, I've never heard people make an issue of the fact that our rates are higher or lower than any other countries.
Especially
it's kind of a unique moment in global monetary history that suddenly where your rates are vis-a-vis the rest of the world really matters. Now, if you look at U.S. rates on their own, they're low relative to almost any sort of like U.S.-only metric, whether it's like U.S. inflation. We have zero real rates, whether it's U.S. growth, which is pretty good. It's the highest in the world. The only benchmark by which our rates look high is the rest of the world. It used to be that Fed officials flatly said the rest of the world doesn't matter in how we set interest rates, except as far as it affects growth. So why should we start lowering rates now just because other countries are lower?
This is one of the things that President Trump does so well, which is that he points out stuff that no one's talking about. And I don't agree with the idea that he brings forward, which is to use rates competitively.
Right.
But the idea, Greg and Jay, of the linkage between the currency, between the rates, and between trade is something that is not being talked about in Jackson Hole, not being talked about globally, and nobody's in charge.